and gentlemen, it is time for prize fighters, circus freaks, and gangsters. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Greta.
And as always, we are here, two teachers, former teachers, trying to teach you guys about the history of the 19th century using the media that is surrounding us right now in order to do so. And we have the greatest show to watch right now.
Yes.
This is like Spanish Warrior right now.
I thought the same thing.
Oh my God. Well, why don't you tell everybody what this is?
We have a Spanish show of Zorro in California, and it is the most beautiful graphic novel-y, comic booky telenovela of the adventures of our man Zorro in 19th century California.
Except it lacks the pregnant pauses that you promised me would be a part of this premise. I don't know. I was just trying to go with bees there.
I mean, but let's just get back to the basics. Do we have fighting?
Oh, we have fighting.
Do we have fashion?
We have so much. My God, the fashion. I am going to be using this it's like a fashion plate for the rest of my life. The colors are amazing. What else?
And this is so full of escapist fun, I can hardly hold myself together.
Plus, there's zero gore, which actually is very refreshing. He is old school Batman style, not killing anybody.
Unless it's decorative. There's some fashionable splatters just to punctuate the points.
Oh, yes, but it's like, there, you got in there with the alliteration as well. I love it. But yeah, it's a dollop of blood that they're just like, it's a suggestion. Where there's a bullet hole that would have been a miney ball just tearing the biggest hole in the world through a person and gory chunks flying everywhere, it's just a spot of blood. And they're like, that guy died, the end.
I know, it's like realism. Who needs it? Because you know who doesn't need realism right now? Me. I can do without some realism.
I don't know what you're talking about. This weekend was amazing. We have hope. We have hope in America. We might not have to flee.
It's true, but I'm just saying a little rest from the reality and like let's go on an adventure.
And this is an adventure, and like we were saying in the past, it is nice to get the opposite view. We're getting the Mexican side, finally, the Mexican side of California and that story.
And even as a character in this episode says, sometimes to get the whole picture, you need to have an observer who's just out of it. And so we get a much bigger picture of like what the hell was going on in California in the 19th century. And it's no longer California, it's California.
Yes, Alta California.
Yes.
Wow, if only we could get Arnold in here to give us the proper pronunciation of that word. Governor Schwarzenegger, he really had his finger on that one.
So, I mean, this has got to be one of the best openings to a television series I have seen possibly ever, but definitely in ages. I mean, this goes hard for the drama.
Not only the drama, but the callbacks to all. I mean, this show is a loving homage to every old school swashbuckling movie that I never watched, but I've seen in clips. You know, where they're all of the hiding in between the rafters and jumping down on people and knocking their heads together and swinging from the chandeliers. And all of that goofy nonsense is in this thing, making it look amazing. It just looks so fun.
And it was just sort of like, okay, this is going to be an adventure tale, and I want to pull you in right away. And we start off with a mysterious man in a cape on a black horse galloping across the countryside in the dark. And you're like, all right, what's going on?
What we do know is the man has impeccable taste in lipstick shades, because in any light, you might only be able to see his lipstick, but you can see it faintly. And boy, he has full and luscious lips, doesn't he?
Indeed. Well, you know, when you've got a mask on and you're limited in your expressiveness, you got to make the most of what you can make.
Well, he is making the most of those full, pillowy lips.
Indeed. And so after...
Literally all I could see as this Zorro is riding around his lips. I'm just like, damn, those are shiny lips.
Those are shiny lips. So we start off with a woman being gunned down by 3 evil men in masks. And then they set up the guy to take him out. And they ask him, ¿Dónde está tu patrón? Where's your boss? He's like, dunno. I'm like, it's too bad. Kaboom, boom. Kaboom. But while this is going on, another man dismounts his horse in his dramatic long coat and is sneaking towards the bad guys.
Ooh, he looks good. I mean, just everybody on this show looks good.
Right?
If on Warrior they got an A for fashion, we're going to have to invent a new letter for what this is. Because, my God, they did it all the way.
Well, in Warrior, I feel like they kind of went with this sort of fantasy fashion. Like, what if we took 21st century sensibilities and plugged it into 19th century fashion? Whereas these guys are like, what if we just kept 19th century fashion and then like upped the tailoring a little bit to when we have some modern fabrics? And so, like, I feel like they're both A's. They're just doing it in slightly different ways.
Oh, yeah. No, that's not taking nothing away from the costuming. But, I mean, these jackets that these guys are wearing in this, not in this scene, but in other scenes, you want to rub your face on them. They look like they would be as soft as a kitty cat. Like, they just, God, I want to wear these clothes.
And we get Alejandro de la Vega comes out with his super flashy sword with the beautiful handguard, and it is sword fighting goodness with slow motion and spinning and circles and multiple opponents. I mean, just everything you want in your, like, grab you by the lapels and watch this sword fight.
Oh, yes. We have back-to-back sword fighting. And, I mean, you only see back-to-back sword fighting in Three Musketeer movies and Zorro films. You never see 2 guys stand back-to-back and battle all the ne'er-do-wells on the planet otherwise.
And you were complaining in an earlier one, you're like, man, I kind of wish I could see the guys fighting like 2-handed, sword in one hand and then like another weapon in the other hand. And what was the other weapon he had?
Oh, a tomahawk. Oh, so badass. So badass. And very historically accurate.
And so this was my confusion back in Warrior. I'm like, oh, well, I thought like the throwing hatchets, the throwing tomahawks were an American weapon. And you're like, yes, but no, but. And so it was really cool to see them as like the throwing hatchets, the battle hatchets in Warrior, but then see them in their American context here. So it was like 1, 2, boom.
Yeah. All of these things are just layering in on top of each other. We are going to have the richest 19th century universe by the time we're done. Just
oh my goodness. Yes. And this episode lays it all out. And Zorro and Alejandro de la Vega, they vanquish the bad guys. Everything's going to be okay. Zorro rides off into the night. But no.
Oh, and I love that Zorro's talking to his horse through the whole thing. Like, listening to his horse like they're partners. And, so Tornado's his partner. And, that's amazing. So they go and they seek shelter in a church like they're Manuel Noriega. And, boy, that's a dated reference, but that's the only reference I could think of.
But poor Alejandro gets shot in the house as Zorro, rides away. And he's like, what's wrong, boy?
Yeah.
The federales pop up over the ridge and you're like, oh no. And so, he rides for the church. He rides for the mission church. And this is the biggest, stoniest, sort of carven, rough-looking church. Like, you're out on the frontier.
Oh, yeah. And, again, I'm sure you've been to them, too. When you go to those old desert mission churches, they are dark and they're surprisingly cool inside. But, they're scary as hell. But, yeah.
Well, because they're basically caves. They got the whole grotto thing going.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's really what they are. They are a cave.
And so we have the classical, like, clearly this is part of the Zorro legend that, he gets in trouble, he runs into the church for sanctuary, and as always, the federales, they follow him inside, and this time it's because they can see his bloody footprints on the stone.
Yes, he's left a blood trail into the church, and so they storm into the church, and they're doing their best impression of the Germans in Inglourious Bastards.
Oh, I mean, the bastard Spanish governor, he's needed in here, and he's like, ugh, we have to make an example of this Zorro. He is, yeah.
Oh, I've been trying to get the pronunciation. I have not been able to do it any justice, but you got it there. Yeah.
I mean, and they get so many of the notes right. This church is in Los Angeles, Los Angeles, because it's still Spanish.
Ooh.
But the fact that they have some candles in there, because it's a church, you got to have candles, but the actual chandelier is an oil chandelier, which would have totally been on point because San Francisco, Los Angeles are both whaling ports, and so it's going to be cheaper to get whale oil in for just your everyday lighting kind of stuff. And so you get that crashing to the ground and the oil spills, and there's a conflagration within the church, and
And let's talk about the lighting. I've never spoken about the lighting in anything. I mean, other than when they were using blue filters back in the day, that was the thing, and that's what we thought lighting was. My God, this movie looks like everything is by candlelight. And they make a point of, pointing out the candles and, the little lanterns that people are using and the oil lights and everything. They are in the shot, and it shows you how naturally that this looks like the lighting is. And it's so phenomenal. You feel like you're in it. Except you're just not it's like the 19th century if you could travel back in time without the smell-o-vision or the cow shit everywhere. It's like Disney's version of the 19th century. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, this is very Disney-fied. Everybody looks clean and comfortable, but that's fine. I don't care. We've got excellent action. We've got gorgeous sets. We've got dramatic music because they set up the death of old Zorro. Just good God.
He gets shot a couple of times like he's Jesus Christ in the church with his arms outstretched, and then he climbs to the top of the church and dives off backwards,
in
martyring
the
himself.
Crucifixion pose. I mean, so when I was saying dramatic pauses, the pregnant pauses that you were worried about, it wasn't so much that, it's sort of the dramatic slow-mo, and this episode goes hard with that.
The pacing on this is way better than Bass Reeves. This moves. A Bass Reeves episode felt long. Yeah. This thing flies.
Yeah. So whereas with Bass Reeves, you had to watch to get everything here, you got to watch because it just happened. So much is going on. I mean, it's only the cold open, and we have the whole introduction of and death of Zorro 1. You're like, ah!
Oh, and Zorro is some Native American tribe.
Yes.
We don't know which one, but he is not a white guy. He is Native.
Yes.
And when he's hung up after he kills himself, and then his body is taken away by the Native tribe that he is part of.
Yes. And the governor hung him up to be an example to other ne'er-do-wells and miscreants who would go up against the governor of California.
Fucking worked out great for the Romans, so he's... This guy's clearly a Rhodes Scholar.
And so, we have this a whole, little mini adventure crammed into the beginning of this show, and you're like, all right, I'm on board, let's go. And then the opening credits. Were those beautiful and fun, or what?
It was amazing. So it looks like, what were those movies? The Frank Miller movies that came out in the noughties. Sin City. It looks like it's got a Sin City vibe. And it's I want to watch a Zorro cartoon that made out of the opening credits of this show. Everything about the show rules.
Yeah, it's basically an animated graphic novel at this point. And it's... You're like, okay, yes, please, let's do it. Let's go. I mean, and the Warrior opening credits and this were like drinking from the same design well, but they went in two different directions. And there is very much a like, okay, there is going to be a Spanish narrative and there's going to be sort of like the Western tribes, Native American narrative. Like those are the two sides, or those are the two big pieces, along with like the whole landscape of Spanish California. And you get all of that and you're like, okay, I know what's going on. Let's play. Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm still waiting for like O'Hara to just like burst into a scene and be like, God damn it, where's Chinatown? Why is everybody speaking Spanish? You know what I mean? Like, he feels like he should be in the show, just like grimacing and pissed off that now he's working the beat in Chinatown and Los Angeles. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
well, who knows? I mean, we may get to San Francisco, because that's another fun thing about this. But after all of this introduction in California, like, we open up. Wait a second. We're in Madrid? We're in Spain?
Yeah, and I was confused.
Meanwhile...
I was confused. Now 2 very, very beautiful, clean-cut white kids are breaking into a rich person's house in Madrid, Spain.
Yes. Or maybe it's a military barracks. I can't tell. Something's going on. But yeah, there's these guys breaking in through a window and soldiers running around the house. Something's up.
And these guys are young and pretty, and they're up to mischief that is clearly... Yes. Not even slightly nefarious. These guys couldn't be up to anything worse than, like, at worst, PG-13 mischief. They're not even going all the way to dropping an F-bomb. They might throw one S word in there, but it's on accident because they stubbed their toe.
Yeah, and they can't be that sneaky because they're wearing those brilliant, bright white shirts. So that you can tell these are rich boys, too.
Yeah. They are just so pretty, too. Everybody in this show is just pretty as hell.
Yes. Yep. And so it turns out it's Diego de la Vega, baby de la Vega, and he's at spy school, and he's only kind of good at it.
But he discovers at the end of his test that his father, who is the man who was stabbed at the beginning of the show, has been murdered, and so now he must leave spy school to return to Los Angeles. And you know, what better position to be in when your father's murdered than to be in spy school, nearing, right? You know, he's kind of a Luke Skywalker. He's ready to go avenge his father.
Yes, and they do us this giant favor, show us the port of Los Angeles, and it is...
It's so beautiful, it's crazy.
Right? You got the tall ships. You got the Chinese coolies kind of walking by the ships. You've got the Native Americans kind of wondering. Like, it is a rainbow of humanity at the Los Angeles docks.
They make it look like the nicest place any people have ever lived, ever. And I'm certain that it wasn't. But I would love... No. But it has the same coloring scheme that Godzilla Minus Zero had. And I told you how fantastic that film was, where it felt like a colorized black and white film. And that's really what this scene felt like. Because the colors were a little bit muted. They were a little mute. And you know, it wasn't quite so vivid. And it gives it a more realism, I feel like.
Yeah. But boy, those were the cleanest ships. Those were the cleanest streets. Those were the cleanest dockside lurkers I have ever seen. But that's okay, because we're not really spending a lot of time here.
Yeah. And
but
plus,
boy,
if they had the proper amount of flies in this situation, we would not have been able to see what was going on.
Not a single rat.
It just basically would have been rotting fish heads and piles of horse manure and clouds of flies.
So... Diego, he gets his horse, and, you know, he heads back to Hacienda de la Vega, and Spanish dudes be emotional. I mean, we have some tearful scenes, some trembling lips, some heartfelt hugs.
If you were looking around this beautifully lit, sumptuously accommodated place, wouldn't you have tears in your eyes? Wouldn't your lip tremble a little bit?
Yeah.
As you sat,
especially after
as you sunk into the crushed velvet, and I think you might have a tear in your eye.
Especially after I just got off a boat, coming across the ocean for a couple of months and getting through that stinking thing. Oh, I would be crying tears of joy. And I have my faithful man greeting me and, hauling off my uncomfortable boots and just, oh my God. Yeah. Well, and his dad's dead too.
Yeah, this is when even the rich people had to hump their asses overland through 40 miles of jungle in Panama to get to LA.
Yep.
So it didn't matter how fucking rich you were still walking overland through the jungle. 40 miles. Woo, that's a bad time.
Yeah. Or sailing all the way around. Either way, but
which is even worse.
Yeah. Yeah. No, he looks like he did the walking because he's an athletic dude. But yeah, he gets back and we get to see, like you said, crushed velvet. There's books, there's globes. I mean, the De La Vegas, they are rich. They are filthy, stinking wealthy.
They are doing all right for themselves.
And they have a bat cave. I mean, a Zorro cave. I mean, a secret lair. Because
boy, they just even down to Zorro's butler is traditionally deaf mute, and so in the show he is deaf mute, and I thought it was cool that they had like kind of a pidgin sign language thing going on because there's been various types of sign language throughout history, and I don't know if that one's historically accurate because I'm not an expert in sign language, but.
I bet not, and I bet it doesn't matter, because, obviously, he and his dude would have just come up with their own set of signs.
You're right, yeah. And sign language is usually very regional, so.
And it turns out that the details of, Diego's father were recorded, and so he's like, all right, there's a mystery, and I'm going to solve it.
Yes.
But first,
there is the most gorgeous woman who has ever existed in cute as hell in what kind of hat is that?
I don't know, but it's sort of like a working man / kind of peasant-y kind of hat. I mean, it is like the wide brim because it's sunny.
Yeah. Looking like
can
Selma Hayek if she was in The Breakfast Club.
There you go.
Like that's the kind of vibe she has.
Except, I'm sorry, naked shoulders, excuse me, outdoors in the sun, get back. No. That
You shut your fucking mouth. This woman wears whatever she wants. She is a goddess.
That vest with no shirt underneath, I will not accept that. That's nonsense.
There were women walking around with bare heads, bare boobies, every kind of bareness that there was. And you know what? I'm here for it. Thank you.
So this is...
I hope that this stays as historically inaccurate from the fashion perspective on the women's attire as it is.
So yes, our darling tomboy Lolita, she's up there fixing the roof and she sees Dieguito come in and she's like, can't believe he's back. Well, I'll show him.
And nearly falls off a roof about it. I love it. They get the kind of high school movie, romantic angle in there. This show is amazing.
Oh, it is. It is 100% like high school, early college rom-com level of maturity by our two main characters in the romance. I mean, they are acted stupid, but in the funnest stupid way. So let's go. Let's roll. Let's do it.
Hell yeah. We were 20-year-old morons once, but unfortunately our actions had consequences.
So Diego's welcomed in by, the family friends. We're so sorry to hear about your father. Gorgeous. I think that was either chocolate or tea. Who knows? Either would have been appropriate. But yes, they're serving him fancy drinks from fancy drinking vessels, and everybody's being very civilized and nice.
So that would be sweetened still, right? It would be sweetened chocolate if it was... chocolate.
Yeah, the stuff that the Spanish were drinking, they're like, this drink that you have is very interesting and puts a little pep in my step, but that is some bitter shit. You know what we have? We have sugar, so we're going to fix that right up here.
Thank you, Spanish. Woo, chocolate is bitter as hell without any, it's like eating cinnamon without sugar. My God, that is a nightmare.
And so it may have even been chilled. Like they're serving it out of the fancy porcelain that we associate with hot tea, but serving chilled chocolate was like the height of hospitality at this point.
How do you even serve chilled chocolate?
Well, first of all, you're rich as hell, so you're importing ice because ice was being shipped around the world at this point. But also you're, at the base of the Sierra Nevadas. And so, you send your legions of hot and cold running servants to bring it down in donkey baskets.
So they just brew it like coffee then?
So, well, you would typically heat up milk, and then you would put in ground chocolate beans, cocoa beans, and then you had like this special wooden thing that you would spin to froth it up, and you'd usually sweeten the milk first and then froth it up in there, and then
so they were just drinking chilled chocolate milk.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was just chocolate milk. Yeah. I thought it was. I thought there was something more going on there.
No.
Oh, okay, cool. Gotcha.
Or maybe if it was cold, they would use water. I don't know. I like this whole thing with the Spanish just being obsessed with chocolate beverages. I knew, but I didn't know about the chilled beverages until recently, and so I'm gonna have to figure that one out.
I thought it was sipping chocolate, which I've only had once, but that's like you couldn't eat that cold because then it would be solid. So it's sipping chocolate for anybody who's never had it. Is basically liquefied chocolate that you eat with a tiny little spoon out of like an espresso cup.
It is super thick, yeah.
It's the most amazing thing in the world.
But you're right. No, you would be like king.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be a brick.
But no, the Spanish in these hotter climates were like obsessed with making these chilled chocolate beverages. And when you're at the base of these mountains that have plenty of snow, and you've got plenty of poor peasants to like send off to do your bidding, you could go get me some more snow. Okay, go.
I can imagine that the first time people had chocolate milk was like the first time they had Coca-Cola, where you see like that, you see those videos and like a bomb goes off in their head and they're like, oh my God, my life is like, this is why I'm alive.
Yeah, exactly. But yes, so they're being all polite and family and, doing all the dignified stuff. And then Lola is in there like choosing which clothes. And at first she's like, okay, I'll put on my proper dress and do the thing my mama would like me to do. She's like, no, I will wear my peasant skirt and I'll show him who's boss. Oh.
Plus, there's nothing hotter than those peasant dresses. My wife's been wearing them basically nonstop for weeks, and every time she puts on something else, I'm just like, "What? We don't like the dress anymore? What's
But that skirt that she's wearing, that's all woven and like patterny, that is a very typical sort of weaving pattern that would be found among the peasantry and the local indigenous population. So this was sort of like, I'm not going to put on my fancy Spanish clothes. I'm going to stay in my like work on the roof clothes.
Yeah. Well, and then I'm sure that off camera that there was a lecture delivered by mom and dad about how you wear different clothes for different activities, like you and I received over and over and over throughout our lives while we're being drilled with Emily Post and other assorted upper class nonsense.
Either that or she's just daddy's favorite. And what am I going to do with you, Lolita? I just don't know. Or, and the whole thing, we see that she's engaged. She's got the engagement ring, but she hides it. Like, she's conflicted. Oh my God, it's my old love. But no, wait, I have changed and he must know this and I will show him. I was just like,
she's engaged. I love that they set up. She's engaged to the asshole who killed Zorro in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
So he's the top cop dickhead. And he's staring down our new super spy from Spain like he wants some smoke. It's very fun. So there's the same high school drama of, well, it's the bad boy from the other school who's now come in to date his old girlfriend, and now the high school quarterback is pissed off about it. It's so amazing.
But before we can get to all of that, we have to pause and have a mysterious dream episode. Which was so good. I mean, and all of this stuff is going on, and Diego's unsettled and everything, and we have sort of the mysterious ceremony around the fire, and it will rain blood, and it does, and and Diego's.
Did you ever catch what native tribe that
Nope.
this is supposed to be? I didn't. Okay, yeah, I didn't catch either. I don't even know what tribes were native to that region in the air. In that era.
And also, if we're in the 19th century, you have a lot of you had the East Coast tribes that were pushed into Oklahoma, which pushed a lot of the Plains tribes and the Comanches kind of being pushed over into California. And so there was a huge mishmash of kind of what they were doing. And so I'm not even going to try to guess. They really just look like they sort of picked up the most picturesque aspects of a whole bunch of tribes and just smooshed them together to just make it look really fucking cool.
I thought I heard them say Ute or Paiute, which makes sense because they, like you were just saying, they would have been pushed out of Utah.
Right.
But I might have just been listening for something that I recognized and just kind of taken something out of context.
Right.
So.
But the idea that you might have had sort of a confederation of tribes that all sort of had come together and said, this is fucking bullshit. We got to find a way to deal with all of these different invaders. Because if you look at it, the American story is that the Americans showed up and then they just shoved all of the Indians west. But as we learn, Native Americans were being invaded from 3 sides, for God's sakes. Or 4 sides. You had the British and the French coming down from the north. You had the new Americans coming from the East Coast. You had the Spanish coming up from the south, and then you had the Russians. What the fuck are the Russians doing there?
And the Chinese. Don't forget the Chinese, the Russians and the Chinese.
From the West Coast. So talking about surrounded. And so if the idea of a whole bunch of tribes sort of coming together and combining forces and traditions, and that's not even crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in the middle of that, you have a bunch of German farmers going, power to the people, but leave me the fuck alone, please. I'm just trying to grow some food here.
Yeah, though they were mostly in the Northeast, and sort of heading west into Minnesota and Michigan and stuff
I guess,
that.
they stayed more north. Yeah, they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they are a northern people.
Well, and it I had never really thought about this, but my last episode on fish got me thinking about it. A lot of the reason that you have sort of a lot of the Germans and the Nordic people kind of around the Great Lakes. I mean, so it's freshwater fish instead of saltwater fish. But if you have a very sort of fish and farming lifestyle, well, what's better than living between 2 mini oceans?
Yeah, you make
that you can actually
that
drink.
You make a really, really good point there. That is really the closest thing they could have gotten to continental European climate and the lifestyle. Yeah, that makes great sense. Huh.
And I had never thought about it in that context. And then also they're also used to living without that much salt, because it's pretty much almost impossible to make salt in the Nordic countries because it's so fucking cold. And then also the seawater up there is a little more dilute because just the iceberg situation as well. And all the snow melt coming out of the fjords. And so living in the Midwest around the Great Lakes without a lot of salt, but a ton of fish, and you're able to farm, they know how to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So you're not going to get that many Germans shoving people around. But, I mean, they're traveling around like everybody else. But...
yeah, they really did just kind of translate the Hanseatic League.
Yeah.
The whole vibe of that just went to the Midwest. Huh. Yeah, and then Detroit became the last stop of freedom, to freedom, being basically the most open city in the world. Well, if it's being populated by all those people from Scandinavian countries, it makes sense that everybody was like, we don't really care. We're just trying to survive here.
You can buy some fish from us because we will sell it to you. But anyway, so back to our spirit dreams. I mean, we get the handover, we get the mask, we get the sword, we get the horse. Tornado!
Yes. Tornado chooses his Zorro. So as soon as he was like, "You're Zorro," then Tornado just shows up and is like, "Yep, I second it. You're Zorro."
And so Nan Lin, who is the sister of old Zorro who got killed at the beginning of the episode, she's like, "What? What? This pretty boy just like drops in out of the sky and you give him all the shit? I am a badass and I was gonna go kill the governor of California and right the wrongs and unevil the evil. Well, fine. I'm gonna go rogue."
Yeah. How the fuck are you going to let a rich person fight for poor people? It makes no sense. I'm doing my own thing.
And the funniest thing is Diego's like, "Oh, I'm Zara, I guess. I don't know. Okay, whatever. Sure. Let's go home. I don't know." And Nan Lin, she is so mad. She is ready to tear somebody's head off.
Yes. And Nan Lin's a total badass, by the way. Yeah. So, I mean, she totally gives me the vibe of the woman in the Predator sequel, Prey, which we'll have to do as well because that kind of goes with this.
Yes.
But, and it's in the same time period. But yeah, she's like, I'm thinking like, she's not going to be a sidekick to Zorro because this is not a sidekick. She is not an NPC. This is a main character.
Yes.
So what is happening here? Are there going to be two Zorros? I'm hyped.
Yes. We wake up the next morning. A comment I wanted to make real quick about that raining blood thingy. So that's a phenomenon that will actually happen sometimes in the Southwest, where the rain will fall and it will be red, or it'll be sort of rusty colored.
Due to the red mud in the area?
Yeah. The dust will all get up in the air, and so when you have more particulate in the air, sometimes that will cause rain to happen faster than when you have like completely clean air. And if you get sort of a dust storm kind of in there with all of that like red sand, red dirt, red rock around there, you can get rain that rains down and like creates red streaks. So this was an actual phenomenon in the Southwest.
Ah, well, let's I could just imagine if that were to happen today, what would be going on Fox News.
Oh my God.
Fox News would be predicting that we were all going to die.
I don't get migraines, but I think you just gave me my first. Whoa!
The apocalypse is here.
Ay. Okay.
Oh, boy.
But anyway, so Diego kind of isn't sure exactly what he's going to do, but he's like, "You know what? Okay, I'll do the Zorro thing, but as Bruce Wayne, I will go about my business as the sad son who's just trying to get justice for his dad, the only way a rich boy can."
Also, you can see that the evangelical Christianity has not caught on in America at this point, because after probably the 1880s, this blood rain thing would have gone from a good omen of like, we found Zorro and like to, oh my God, the world's ending. We're all going to die.
Well, fortunately, this happened at night, so all good church-going people would be snug in their beds.
There you go. At this point, the world is still round and still over 10,000 years old. So they're snug in their beds.
Yes. And besides, California is still Católica at this point. And we know this because it is St. Carmel Day, and there's a big parade, and everybody's out, and they've got the relic, walking through the streets, and it's the place to be.
I had no idea there was so Mount Carmel is named after St. Carmel. I had no idea there was a St. Carmel.
Yeah, like you think about like...
Look at that. Learn something new every day.
Carmelite nuns, and I don't know exactly who St. Carmel is or was, but like Carmel, California.
Probably a candy-related saint. We gotta love him.
No, not enough vowels. Like we say caramel, but it's
tragic.
really caramel.
Well, fine.
Fine.
You're ruining all my fun today.
I am, except for all of the other fun. But yes, so we have everybody gathered, and they're kaboom. There's a big explosion at the port. Oh no! What's going on?
It's the world's cleanest explosion.
And it doesn't cause any other buildings to burst into flame.
Yeah. As we know from San Francisco, if a building blew up in Los Angeles at this time, that would mean all of Los Angeles burnt down again.
Though this building also seems to be kind of separated from the others. But anyway, they're like, this Indian was standing near the building that exploded. So obviously we have to go hang him.
Boy, that is just, it's just been happening to anybody who isn't, who is just too tan in America since like the 1600s, I guess. It's just like, anytime anything happens, anything at all, that, well, the sun came up. That black guy's been standing there all morning. We better hang him. Like, what the fuck? It's just it's like the way they marked events back in the day was just hanging a person who wasn't white enough, I guess.
But Diego finds this wrong. An injustice, I tell you. And now he's got a Zorro up.
But we get Russians. We get Russians for the first time.
Yes.
We get a Russian, and I'm so happy about it.
Because it's a Russian, it's a Russian storehouse for furs. That's who's collecting the otter pelts.
Yes, and as we discussed in our Warrior episodes, the Russians were not heavy in this region, but they were there. They were in the mix.
Oh yeah, because this is where they were collecting a lot of the otter pelts, and as with all sort of Zorro / Bruce Wayne situations, we have to have a fancy party where all the power plays get together, and Diego can exercise his spy school powers a little bit.
Boy, I just don't even know who looked the best in this. Because their party clothes, their finery was so fine. Oh my God, they looked amazing.
And I will say that, Diego and Lola, of course, looked the best. And Lola's dress was like a little scanty, but everybody else, all of the older women around her, were dressed so correctly. Like, everything was as it should have been. Even the Russian sort of lady who was partnered to the Russian official, her outfit was like the lines. I was like, oh my God, I recognize that.
So let's talk about, so the Russian and his girl are dressed so oddly. It was like a Star Trek party but I guess that's what this was. It was like the Mos Eisley bar back then because it was so...
Yes.
And nothing was homogenized back then. So everybody had their own different regional dress. So the guy was wearing like a fez, basically, and kind of a military uniform-ish.
Basically, yeah. At this point, if you were in fashion in Russia, you basically wore a military uniform because the Tsar was just military mad. So everybody was kind of dressed like... Your nice outfits were like these very sort of stripped down, hardline fashion uniforms.
Yeah, with a fez, which is odd because, they were really at odds with the Ottoman Empire at all times, but they love their hats.
Well, it was just like the round cap. Basically, it just doesn't have the bill out front. And so it was.
Oh, okay.
So if you think about like the Russian hats that are just like those circular big fur hats.
Right.
Yeah, it's a variation on that.
Oh, gotcha.
And if you think about even the Orthodox Christian, like, patriarch hats, what they look like, they don't have any sort of, like, bill or anything. They're just these very sort of round hats as well. So the round...
He did have that vibe.
Yeah, the round hat
sure.
with no brim is just, like, a very Russian fashion.
Gotcha. And then her outfit looked like Asian. It was like Mongolian. There was fringe and
bingo.
Okay, yeah. Kind of like Princess Amidala almost. Kind of headed in that direction.
Right, yeah, that crossover of Eastern Russian, Mongolian, Northern Chinese, you see that influence all the way across. And the sort of like, not exactly paisley, but these sort of like quasi-floral spray patterns of branches and stuff. Yeah, that, and then sort of these very capey type cuts. Mm-hmm. And yeah, because there is that like somewhat practical fashion instead of all like these bustles and ruches and panniers and like these crazy shapes that Western European women's fashions had. the Russian ones, until the French influence got into Russia, was this sort of like very flat, like, oh, she could jump on a horse at any second kind of look to them.
Oh, that's cool. I imagine that would be a much
Yeah.
more liberating way to dress in that time period, because this was just the beginning of the bloomers period in the United States.
Right, right. Because a lot there's a lot going on. And bloomers actually also came out of English fashion as well. But no, the Eastern, like Russian and East fashions had a much flatter aspect to them. They didn't have all these extra bubbles attached.
Yeah, you didn't have enough clothing for another 3 dresses wrapped around you. Just the
Well, actually, they did. They
Oh,
had
did they?
layers and layers of petticoats. It's just you didn't have a lot of these frames and fake asses and fake hips and everything.
the built-in BBL that of the old school.
Yeah, exactly. But I also noticed, like, not only were there Russians and people in what looked like English dress and then Spanish dress, they actually had a black servant
Well,
at this.
they have a black servant who is another person in disguise.
I know, it was so cool. But even so, she stood out because that would have been like a rich flex in California to actually have a black servant instead of the indigenous servants, which were just sort of littering the ground at that point.
Oh, okay. And everybody was quite polite to her, which I found interesting. But I would assume in Mexico, the racism against people for the color of their skin would have at least been somewhat reduced, because Spanish people aren't exactly the lightest skinned people on earth either.
Well, not the Mexican, not South and Central America, where you have the Creole population, where you have people marrying into the indigenous population. But the whole thing where Diego shows up and he's got a little bit of that Spanish accent where, like, he says Barcelona. Like, they're like, oh, you're from Spain. And he's like, yeah, and check out my fair complexion, by the way. And so
Yeah.
in terms of, like, could you be a business owner or a landowner, or could you, like, work your way up the greasy pole of society? That was not a skin color thing. That was definitely like a who's your daddy kind of thing. But within...
Boy, if you take that sentence out of context and just make a clip out of it, it'll be amazing. The greasy pole of justice and all of it. It's gonna be, it's
The greasy pole of society. Jeez. Get it?
Oh yes. Where were we putting the greasy pole of society
People are
again?
climbing it? What did you think?
Yes. Oh yeah. They were climbing atop the greasy pole of society. That's right.
But within
You got to use a water-based lube always. Always.
I don't think the Spanish had access to that yet. It was all very
Oh, you are blushing so hard. I love it.
stupid video. But within sort of the upper levels of society, then skin color starts to come into play, because are you purebred or are you Criollo? Are you Creole? Are you half something else?
Well, the Spanish also had that in so that racism comes from Spain because of the Moorish conquest of Spain and the various Arab conquests of Spain. So they had a great deal of, even though they had lots of dark potentates of various parts of Spain, Andalusian Spain and things like that. But it came to be that, like, if you were nobility, you were supposed to not have much black blood, correct?
Yes, and in fact, sort of bleaching your hair with lemon juice or other acids to sort of give it more of an auburn cast, or sort of like red hair. This was also another symbol to show, like, I am better than you.
We used to spray our hair. I mean, I'm blonde as hell, but we still used to spray our hair with lemon water juice as kids to make it like super, super bright white.
Yeah, and so if you had really dark hair, you could get like auburn streaks or maybe even some blonde streaks in it from like the salt water and the lemon juice and whatnot. So yeah, while in South and Central America, there was some colorism. It was sort of like more on a gradient. It wasn't the absolutism that was going on in the US. Like you were either black or you weren't.
Oh, that's kind of where I was going. So where is that? You can only get so racist.
So having a black servant at your party shows that like you actually went out and found that person. You didn't just own them.
Very similar to in Oklahoma, like we were talking about when you said, yeah, interesting.
So, but also she stands out, and we'll get to know why, because some of the pieces to our mystery, they're coming together. And Tadeo, Lola's father, turns out like somehow he's all mixed up in this. What's going on? I don't know. Do you know? I don't know.
Yeah, boy, we're all going to be up late trying to figure this one out. This is not a show that's going to require anybody to do some kind of TV show or like podcast about trying to figure out what's going to happen. I think we're all pretty clear what's going to happen.
Oh, and there are a couple other things in this party that I was like, okay, this is so not an American show. This is a show that has a different view of the world. There were women who were playing instruments in the orchestra. There's a Russian and his lady at the party. There's the Californian reporter. Like there was just so much less. There wasn't the homogeneousness, the homogeneity that you typically see at parties in American shows. There's like this recognition that it's a complex world out there. And I just loved that about this party.
That happens throughout the show, too, because when they're showing during the St. Carmel thing, there's everything from Chinese people to rich Spanish people to poor people to everybody is just kind of standing around and they're all there together. They're not, it's not like they're separated by the sides of the street or anything like that.
Yeah.
It is very much a melting pot.
It was so cool. And so we get to meet the sort of head reporter / owner of the Californian, which is the newspaper that keeps showing up. It's so, like they didn't do the thing where the newspaper spins, bam, and you read the headline, but they might as well have, because this is an important like information sharer, because even if you're not reading it, they're telling you what's in it. Like, this is how news gets around.
Oh, the like Batman, and then they spin in the newspaper. Gotcha. Yeah. This really is like Batman 66, but like sexy.
Way better clothes. And the fighting, so much cooler.
And as much as everybody loves Adam West, he cannot hold a candle to the gorgeousness of this, whatever this man's name is, whoever it is. Ooh, he's pretty.
So we find out that the underlying like force running things is the otter fur monopoly. And as a historian, I just cheered, because have you ever heard the otter fur trade and monopoly and the fighting over it mentioned in any sort of American historical anything?
I didn't even know there was an otter fur trade and monopoly.
And it's the pivot point of this entire episode.
I was unaware that such a thing ever even existed.
And then it turns out the black woman who's serving at the party isn't just a servant. She's Harriet the spy.
Yes, and she spilled drinks on our hero because he was a shitty spy, as they told him in spy school, and he was following everybody way too goddamn close and making an ass of himself. So she threw a tray of drinks in his lap to get him to leave everybody alone so she could go do the real spying. She's like, look, amateur, I got this. Go clean your shit.
Yeah. And then the reporter comes in and like yoinks him by the collar and is like,
yeah, you don't know what you're doing. Get out of there.
Yeah. So he sort of gets the poop that like, oh my God, this Tadeo may not have been such a good friend to my father, and he's involved with this fur monopoly and blah, 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 blah. So we get Bruce Wayne with emotions, and now we're wondering, can he save Nightcrow, the Native American who got nabbed for standing too close to the explosion?
And who is going to be his partner in crime? Will it be the gorgeous and deadly Lolita, who shot his hat off his head at a distance while he was riding a horse, so we know she can go? Or is it going to be the badass, what is her name?
Nan-Lin.
Nan-Lin, the badass Nan-Lin, who's like this badass Comanche warrior princess is going to come and avenge her brother's death. It's like, either way, we are going to get the most badass duo. But I have a feeling it's setting it up so these two gorgeous women are going to end up fighting over this man. Don't you think?
They're fighting over me.
Yeah.
So he's going to go out and rescue Nightcrow. He's decided that's what he's got to do. So out comes the mask and the hat and the cape. Do I wear the cape? And I love how his houseman is like, dude, if you're going to Zorro, you got a cape.
Yeah, you got to wear the cape. You got to wear the cape. You got to wear the hat. You got to wear the mask. It's your Zorro now. That's the uniform.
Yeah. If you're going to Zorro, you got to Zorro it up.
Yeah.
And
when you go to church, you wear church clothes. When you go to soccer, you wear soccer clothes. When you go to rich parties, you go to rich party clothes. Yeah, that's the lecture I got every weekend of my life as a kid.
And so it's like, all right, I'm going to Zorro it up. And he rides off and he, for some reason, rides to the top of that pinnacle and rears his horse in front of the full moon. Are we clear that this is Zorro? Because he's officially Zorro now that he's done that.
It's not official until he does it.
No. And we set up that, Nightcrow's in the stockade. And it's the cleanest fucking stockade with the best behaved, most on it soldiers ever in the history of ever.
I don't know what would be worse than an old Spanish prison in Los Angeles in the 19th century. That or Alcatraz, that's about as bad as your life could possibly get, I think.
And so when that flaming Z appears on the hillside, boy, are these guys ready to get the fuck out of there.
Well, also, how is he even doing that? What is he doing it with? Gunpowder? Is he doing it with gasoline, kerosene? What?
Whale oil.
Oh, I see. Yes. Which would be...
the stuff that was in the chandelier at the church that burnt up old Zorro.
Yeah.
Yeah, remember we're on the California coast. Whale oil.
Yeah, and as you said that, then so over the last week, we learned in science that whales have an actual language, a very complex language that's so nuanced that it actually is like a human language where we have a difference between saying what and what. Like, there's that much differentiation in whale language, and we murdered those people for their blubber.
Yes, and...
So that's tragic.
And you know what's even worse? Is the decade in which the most whales were killed? The 1960s.
Well, the last gasps of slavery and of whale murder, I guess. Well, we're doing better, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah.
We're headed to the top now.
I don't know. Anyway, all I can say is enough with reality. Let's get back to
Zorroing.
Zorroing in close quarters fighting. He's got whips. He's got his sword. He's got circles to spin in. People falling down all around him. It's gorgeous.
Oh, yes. And so, again, this guy does not use guns. And his manservant, who tried to hand him a pistol, and he was basically... And this was until the 90s, this is how every red-blooded man in the world felt. That, no, I'm a fucking man. I can handle it with my hands. If I can't handle it with my hands, I shouldn't be there. And so he was just like, no, I don't need a fucking gun. I'm a goddamn man. I got a bullwhip and I got a sword and I'm about to go kick ass. And that's what he did.
And I also have to appreciate that the Spanish all have flintlock pistols.
Yes.
They have these gorgeous, 1 and 2 bullet flintlock pistols that are just fancy and curlicues and unreliable as hell.
Yes, and so right away, as soon as he assaults the Spanish people, one of the flintlock rifles jams, and he goes, rifles jams, but whips never do. As he grabs their guns with his whip and yanks them out of their hands, and then bashes everybody on the head with the pommel of his sword rather than stabbing them, or smacks them with the flat of his sword, and knocks their legs out from under them with the flat of his sword. He never is killing anybody or cutting them if he can help it.
Yeah, he'll trip them with his whip and everything. And of course, to just make this whole thing even more fun and just go along for the ride, the music through this whole show is just, telling you how to feel, and it's great.
Oh, it's the best popcorn bombastic. Like, it's exactly like those blockbuster movies that we used to watch with all the swashbuckling. It's all of that, but with the same, like, PG joie de vivre that we have in the rest of the show. It's amazing.
Yes, and we get a few more great tropes, as Zorro and Nightcrow escape. Yeah, spoiler. The Federales are like riding after them, and you've got the tracker down in the dirt. It's like, they're headed to the De La Vega place. Let's follow them.
We'll head them off at the pass.
Exactly. And so Zorro and Nightcrow, they get back to the hacienda, and okay, we're gonna have to have the showdown against the soldiers. No, wait. Nanlin is there, and she's gone rogue, and she's gonna tell you about it. And boy, is she bad with a spear.
Yo, her wushu skills are amazing. She has been to China. She has studied with the best Chinese kung fu masters, and she has come back prepared to do spear forms. She's not going to fight with this, but
Yes.
she's going to do spear forms, and she did a lot of them.
She's gonna leap over you. It's gonna look so cool.
She's going to wave a spear around. She whipped his ass, though. She kicked the shit out of him.
Yes. Now, the hatchet thingies on her back, I'm like, were those in her braids, or were those her, like, extra hatchets that she was wearing on a harness? I never really could get that clear.
They have to be in a harness. To my knowledge, I don't think anybody ever carried hatchets in their hair. Although that would be amazing. Little mini baby hatchets in your hair would have been... I'm sure women thought about it when they were riding the trolleys back in the day, and they were like, I ran out of hat pins 6 stops ago. Like, I can't stab anymore. I need a hatchet now.
I love it. But, again, this is just such a sweet, fun fight scene. It didn't have, like, the fast-paced, like, precision of Warrior, but it was just as much fun to watch.
Because this is flirty fighting. She was...
Yes.
Bop, 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 bop. See, I told you I'd be a better Zorro than you. Bop, 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 bop. Get the fuck out of here, rich boy. Maybe if you want to date later, bop, 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 we could talk about that. But bop, bop, don't be Zorro.
Yeah.
Nobody's trying to do anything. He's not trying to hurt her. She's not trying to hurt him. She's just trying to prove a point. I should be Zorro, not you.
And then, just when they're, like, facing each other down, you see the dust cloud of the approaching Federales in the distance. And so she, does the coolest underway horse mount ever and just, like, beats it into the distance, and Diego has to figure out what to do.
Luckily, he has been to spy school, and he knows what to do. He just... Clark Kent's it up, cuts a Z on his chest. All of a sudden, his hair is impeccably coiffed. Not a strand out of place.
Yes.
His shirt is torn asunder like his bodice has been torn in a romance novel.
Yes. It's like a dude bodice rip right there.
Totally. And a Z has been artfully drawn on his chest in a knife.
It's the decorative gore. It's just a soupçon of blood splatter to emphasize a point. Zorro was here, and look what he did to my wax chest.
Zorro got me good, and he ran off into the distance then.
And the Federales are like, damn, that Zorro shakes fist in the general direction.
Oh, one thing we forgot to... So Zorro has now left his calling card on our hero.
Yes.
But we saw an actual calling card earlier in the show.
Oh, right, the reporter guy.
Yes, and calling cards were a really important part of social life back in the day. Mm-hmm. Do you know much about calling cards?
I do, but you begin, please.
So calling cards were an important way for people when they wanted to call upon a person, which means to stop by their house. It was a method of introduction. So it would be your basic, like, not quite your resume, but your basic vital information.
Yeah, it's a little bit like texting somebody before you call them.
Oh, that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, so, like, you or your servant would drop the card off at somebody's house and saying, oh, I'd like to see you. Or if you sort of had an appointment, or if you were important enough, you could just, like, roll up to somebody's front door and, okay, first of all, I'm rich. What? I'm going to open my own door? I don't think so. And so you have your butler or your parlor maid or whatever open the door, and it would either be the person or their servant, and they would present the calling card. Now, because this is an object that belongs to a rich person, the servant...
Which is basically a business card, just for anybody who's trying to picture this. It's the same size and shape
Right.
as a business card. It's what became business cards.
And that's why business cards now, I mean, other than the fact that they have to be kind of sturdy, they would be very thick paper made out of rags, not wood pulp paper. They would be like cotton fiber paper. And they would typically be embossed. And so the lettering would actually be a little bit raised or depressed into the card. Like it wouldn't just be like straight written on, because you'd want to prove that this was printed up ahead.
Oh.
So you would do all sorts of things to like super make it fancy. But anyway, since this is an object belonging to a rich person, the servants couldn't touch it, or they weren't supposed to. And so the manservant or whatever would put out a tray for you to drop your card on.
I've seen the tray and all that, but I did not know that it was because they were not supposed to touch the card with their grubby poor hands.
Right? I mean, that was the whole thing about all the servants having to wear gloves, too.
No shit. Wow.
Yeah.
That is wild. And that must have been part of the reason why doctors were so reticent to start wearing gloves. They were like, I'm not some goddamn servant. I'm a rich person who's been to surgery school.
I'm sure there's part of that, because, you know, your servants, like, they've got, like, dirty fingernails, ew, and they have, like, their thick working people's hands, not my slim, long, attractive, never been calloused rich people paws.
Yeah.
My delicately tender nails.
Boy.
And so, so you'd put your card on the salver, that's the fancy name for tray, and then they'd take it to the important person of the house, often the lady, and she would either decide, I'll go into the parlor, or I am not receiving.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then with the card, so everybody back then had, this is a fun time to discuss these. They were like scrapbooks, but I've forgotten exactly what they called them. Do you remember what they called their scrap? Okay, they called them albums, but they would keep these cards a lot of time, the calling card, with a little note about so-and-so stopped by today, because that was their Instagram, their Facebook, everything.
Right.
And so when you had friends, you would go and you would look through their book. Well, if you were friends with them, like you would share your books and be like, oh, well, I went to this county fair and I got this piece of lace or whatever. The
scrapbook. Right? And so this is also the way that like con men and women would get around and get into places, is they would manage to snag an important person's card and then write on the back, Sally is my best friend, please invite them to tea at your earliest convenience.
Oh, that's how you get those introductions.
Right. So you could have a letter of introduction, or you could and forge that, or you could snag an important person's calling card and then create this thing that like, no, this person has connections. Like you would create these false connections for yourself.
Huh.
Yeah.
It's so much fun to see how similar to our own life back then was, even down to like posting on Instagram the same shit, like it's just a book rather than the internet,
right? And you're sharing it with a smaller circle, but it's same shit, different day, 100%.
Tearing pages out of books to keep the quotes in there, and pictures are going in there, and the whole thing, it's exactly the same.
Yeah, it just took a lot more manual effort, and so you had fewer of them, but same thing.
Well, and probably then you were probably keeping more of the shit that was important rather than just any old goddamn thing that happened in the day.
Right. Because you had to be more selective, just because, But anyway, Jamie, do you want to watch another episode of this show?
I can't wait to watch another episode of this show. I am so glad we're watching this.
So this was this Mel who dug this one up?
No, this was me. I just forgotten how good. So I had watched the first 10 minutes of the show and then stopped, and I was like, we have to watch this! And I told you about it, and then totally forgot how good it was. And then you scared me by saying, oh, well, if it's telenovela, there's going to be a lot of pregnant pauses. And I was like, please don't let it be like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Because I struggled to get through the last episode of Bass Reeves, or last two, just because the pacing dragged, and I'd seen the episode so many times, and I couldn't do that again. So I was really frightened, but then it's so much fun.
Oh, okay. So I was like, you were thinking of like needless pregnant pauses, and I was thinking more like dramatic slow motion.
Yeah, and then when you said dramatic slow motion, I started having flashbacks of Justice League sucker punch guy.
Zack Snyder.
Yes, yeah. And his insane love of endless slow motion. So.
Yes. Okay, yeah.
Or 1970s Incredible Hulk slow motion. I was really picturing worst case scenario.
Yeah, but fortunately, so this show, it was produced in the 2020s. I know it sort of got released into the America sphere in 2023, I think, but it really adheres to like the pacing that we want and expect. And so everybody should go watch this Zorro telenovela.
It is on Amazon Prime, and it is amazing.
It is just, it's the escapist nonsense you want. And so you can watch it with everybody speaking in Spanish and just read the subtitles. You can get it dubbed into English, whatever makes your little heart happy.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, Mel and I both want to start learning Spanish, and this might be an easy way to do it. Just watch this show and put the subtitles on.
The thing to understand is that this is Spanish, not Mexican Spanish. And so it's going to be a little bit different, but, you can still do it.
Yeah, I figured. Well, I mean, even if we learned Italian, it would still be close enough. We could get within screaming distance of what we needed to say, whatever. Exactly. In all of those Romance languages, if you know French, Spanish, or Italian, you can at least feed yourself if you have to in any of those countries.
Yes, Italian and Spanish much closer. If you speak French, you're going to make a dickhead of yourself much more quickly in Spain or Italy.
It's pretty easy to make a dickhead of yourself in French one way or the other.
Oh, this was such a good change of pace. Like, the Zorro movie kind of set us up for this. But yes, this is kind of where we started with Warrior. Like, this is fun and pretty and just a rollicking adventure, and this is where I want to be for a while.
I'm here for it. Yes, like you said, we needed a little less reality, a little less grim, dark 19th century, and more fun. And so we're back to the fun.
Yes. So we'll be back next time with episode 2. And I think it involves gold.
I think it involves a gorgeous woman named Lolita. So, yeah, I cannot wait to watch it. Oh my God, that actress is gorgeous.
All right. Well, in the meantime, where can we find you on the internet?
Other than lurking this Lolita's Instagram page, because I need to know what her name is, I am on Instagram at Plague of Strength, where I post every day about strength training and nutrition. All fun stuff, just trying to motivate everybody to be happy and healthy and awesome. How about you? Where are you?
Well, don't you show up on the YouTubes occasionally?
I do occasionally show up on the YouTubes. Last week we did not have a live, but yeah, usually it's a weekly live with Carved Out of Stone on his YouTube. So if you want to check out any of that stuff, it's all on his lives page.
All right. And you can find me in my podcast, The History of American Food, where I am being deluged by all of the changes in American food. The early 19th century, that is where all of the change happens, and I am looking at how having a box o' fire changes how we eat bread and cakes and cookies and all that good stuff right now.
Ah, so you're on to the invention of the oven then?
Yeah, creating iron stoves and ovens, and so no longer necessarily having one baking day where you're baking in that brick oven that you put fire into and then take the fire out of it and it takes all day. Yeah, we're going to boxes of fire in the 19th century, and that just really changes the world, or at least changes American food.
I I didn't realize the 19th century is when we started to get stoves and things. I thought that started to happen before that.
No. It's the early 19th century. But yeah, I mean, they starting to enclose fire in iron surrounds is getting going in the early 18th century, but not very much. People are still cooking in the fireplace.
So it's just stews or barbecue, basically.
Well, I mean, people have griddles and gridirons and all sorts of things like over little burners that they make out of coals. But the speed at which you can make things happen and how often you have to get a new cook because they've died of a fireplace-related mishap starts to go way down.
So this is totally unrelated, but you just mentioned griddles. So now I'm imagining a 19th century lumberjack,
right?
Or a lumberjack crew, and
right.
So we've got the chef for this. He's got to feed all these burly men,
yep.
And he's making flapjacks.
Yes.
What the hell is he making it on if he doesn't have a stove? Does he just have a flat piece of iron with a fire underneath it?
A big iron plate, yes, that he balances on rocks over a pile of coals. Yes.
Oh my God! Balances on how janky could that? No wonder these people are dying of fire-related accidents. Good Lord!
Well, when I say balances, you can build like a really sturdy sort of base for your big iron plate. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm picturing something very janky and just kind of rickety and precariously balanced on little like Blair Witch style piles of rocks. I mean, you did just say fire-related accident deaths, so now yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of like these poor women who are like in these like walk-in fireplaces, and you've got a pole across the top that you've got your big cauldron of oil hanging from, and then the pole breaks and this cauldron of oil just spills out into the kitchen.
Oh my God. I was figuring they were just going up in flames because they were covered in soot all the time.
Well, yes, also...
So they just their clothes were just a cinder, basically.
That would be another thing that happened. You're sort of like dodging between these little like piles of fire that you've built in the fireplace to cook this over here, and then, yeah, your petticoats catch a flame and poof.
Yeah, soaked with cooking oil because it's in the air and you've been splashing it on yourself. And oh my God.
Yeah.
As if the life of woman wasn't bad enough in the 19th century, then you were on fire as well.
Right, and so we put fire in a goddamn box, and things got better.
There you go. I imagine we had to have been getting fire extinguishers around this time as well, huh?
What? This God's will, man. You just burn.
You know, the 19th century giveth, and it taketh away. Here's some hope. Fuck your hope.
All right. Well, that is about it. But until next week, I will see you then to talk some more Happy Zorro.
Absolutely. Everybody have an awesome week and enjoy Zorro.
Yes. You can always reach out to us by email at pcgpodcasters@gmail.com. And you can find more dope beats like this one from royalraven.com.